What's going on, guys? It's Cimo, and welcome to the top 100 Yu-Gi-Oh cards of all time. That's right, in this 10-part series, we're going to be taking a look at some of the craziest, most fucking overpowered cards we've ever seen in this game's history. And we're looking at power creep and the way the game has progressed and just how absurdly powerful these cards have been. It's kind of interesting to measure a card that was powerful back in 2003 to now all the way up to 2018. So before we get into just a couple of guidelines to kind of set moving forward into this list. The cutoff for cards qualified here is going to be Soul Fusion, so anything coming out in like Savage Strike or any sets beyond that are not going to be able to make this list, just for anyone that might be watching this several years into the future. And also, I'm weighing the cards on this list based off of how powerful they were in their prime, as well as how powerful they would be in today's metagame, more so leaning to today's metagame, just because if they were to come off, that does make a really big difference. So I'm kind of leaning on that. It's entirely subjective, but it's going to be a lot of fun, and I can't wait to hear what you guys think about your top contenders for this list as well. But before we get into it, big shout out to all of my patrons as well as my YouTube channel members for all of your continued support and helping make all this possible. And if you want to help support the channel as well, hit the join button down below or check out the links in the description. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. Starting off with number 100, we have Cyber Dragon. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, how the hell did Cyber Dragon make it to the top 100 cards of all time? And if you think about it, Cyber Dragon's legacy is actually rather incredible. I mean, it basically was the card to end GOAT format. Cyber Dragon came out in Cybernetic Revolution, and basically because it was a 2100 special summonable monster, it pretty much just completely warped that format back in 2005, 2006, and basically changed the game forever. This card had such an impact because we had never seen something this powerful previous to that, and it just really had that strong of an impact in the metagame. And as the years would progress, Cyber Dragon would continue to see play in multiple decks. I mean, you move further beyond that format, you saw Cyber Dragon being played in several Monarch variants just because it was a free monster you could special summon, tribute for a Monarch, and be in pretty good position. Then you have the fact that people teched Cyber Dragon against heavy machine-oriented strategies to be able to contact fuse into Chimera Tech Fortress Dragon and basically wipe their entire field. Even today in 2018, you're seeing people still play Cyber Dragon, not to mention it got a lot of support, but Chimera Tech Mega Fleet Dragon is able to help you break extra links. It's able to help you just pretty much remove Sky Strikers from the field. And the thing is, it was all because of Cyber Dragon. If Cyber Dragon never existed, we wouldn't have had this entire just offshoot of all these other Cyber Dragon focused and oriented cards. And honestly, I feel like this is a really good starting point for this list because it's only going to go up from here, and you can imagine there's going to be a lot of power behind this list. And so I feel like Cyber Dragon's kind of a good baseline to get things rolling. But moving on to number 99, we're already going to start getting to the broken shit. Magical Scientist. Now, for those of you who did not play the game back when it first came out, Magical Scientist was a plague upon this game's existence. This essentially was one of the very first FTKs to ever exist. You were basically paying life points to special summon fusion monsters in tandem with something like Catapult Turtle to launch the monsters into your opponent's life points using Catapult Turtle's effect, and you would basically win the game before your opponent even had a chance to play. It was completely degenerate, it was absurdly broken, and that's basically why Magical Scientist has been on the ban list ever since, you know, the ban list first came out. It was one of the first cards ever banned, and rightfully so, because it was so degenerate. A lot of people really hated playing against this deck. I hated playing against this deck, even though I played it for a little bit, but that's neither here nor there. Magical Scientist definitely deserves a spot on this list just because of the lasting legacy it's had on the game, and is still really powerful to this day. I think being able to special summon fusion monsters at the cost of only 1,000 life points in Master Rule 4, just being able to continuously link summon, I think that would be really crazy. Maybe I'm just overthinking it, but it's a very powerful card nonetheless. This is going to bring us on to number 98, and I've got Cyberstein. Now, Cyberstein is one of the craziest cards ever printed, especially back in the heyday when it was a prize card. Now, Cyberstein was crazy because you were paying 5,000 life points to basically summon something like Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, and at that point you could equip it with something like Megamorph to make it a 9,000 attack monster, monster, since your life points were lower than your opponent's, and just OTK them with one big shot. But even in today's metagame, playing something like Cybersign would actually be pretty incredible because there's so many valuable targets that Cybersign can summon out of the extra deck. I mean, Naturia Exterio, being able to just lock your opponent out of being able to use spells and traps. I mean, there's so many just powerful cards that Cybersign helps enable, and yeah, 5,000 life points is very steep, but if you're going to be summoning something that's honestly just going to flat out win you the game, who cares? Life points are a resource to be utilized, and Cybersign is one of the first cards to teach you that life points only mean something when they hit 0. So definitely deserving of that spot. This is going to bring us, though, to number 97. For number 97, I've got Legendary 6 Samurai Shien. And rather than me talking about Shien, I think we've got someone that's much more well-suited to talk about this card.
Hi guys, my name is Sam and I'm from the channel Team Samurai X1. Probably you guys never heard me before. I just recently started Yu-Gi tubing, so if you guys can help me out and subscribe to my channel, that would be absolutely amazing. You guys are just super duper awesome, and a huge thanks to Alex for having me here on the channel. Alex, love you, bro. The card that I like to talk to you guys about is Legendary 6 Samurai Shien, and you can just read by the title of the card, Legendary. He's absolutely legendary. Anyway, 6 Samurai Shien is a 2500 beat stick which requires a warrior tuner and a 6 samurai monster to actually make this card right here. It is a level 5 synchro monster which you can easily make in a 6 samurai base deck, and even crazier, X-Sabers used to play 6 Samurai Shien in their main deck because Parshul is a warrior tuner, and you can just splash in Elder of the 6 Samurai into the deck, so Parshul and Elder makes you a 6 Samurai Shien. But anyways, what Shien does is whenever your opponent activates a spell card, once per turn you can negate it. And if this card were to get destroyed, you can destroy another 6 samurai monster you control instead. Back in the day when Yu-Gi-Oh! Was kinda a slow-paced game, 6 Samurai Shien was probably one of the best monsters that you guys will probably ever see. Popular cards like Heavy Storm during the time, popular cards like Dark Hole, popular cards like Phoenix Shane during the time are really dominant in the metagame, okay? So having a monster which negates any problematic spell or trap card on the board is literally insane. Back then, a 2500 beat stick was pretty hard to actually get over, and the fact that Shien can constantly protect itself by destroying a 6 samurai monster you control is just absolutely busted. Back then, guys, spawn trap cards are very meta dominant because those are the cards that actually help you advance into their plays, and by just bringing a 6 samurai monster which says no, which says negate to anything back in that Yu-Gi-Oh era is definitely dominant, and that's why Shien at one point needed to be limited to 1. This card was at 3 when it first came out, but Konami realized how broken this card really was, so they immediately had to obviously hit Gateway and hit Shien to 1 immediately. And as a matter of fact, Catastor was actually really big in play, but since Shien is a dark, you know, Catastor cannot out Shien. So back in the 6 Samurai era where Yu-Gi-Oh! Was slow and dandy, you know what I mean? A face-up card that says negate was one of the strongest thing that your opponent could actually ever face against. So with these reasons, I believe that Legendary 6 Samurai Shien deserves to be on the top 100 best Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards of all time.
Now for number 96, I've got Cyberjar, and oh man, Cyberjar was a game changer. It's a bit slow by today's standards, it is a flip effect monster, but when Cyberjar got flipped back in the heyday, oh man, it just completely changed the game because you're not only just wiping the entire board, but you're also special summoning a ton of monsters to the field, your opponent included, and you're also keeping pretty much everything else from Cyberjar that you were able to draw off the top 5. Cyberjar just had this absurdly crazy dynamic that anytime your opponent would set a card, you were always wondering if it was one of these very few select cards that were known as the Jar monsters, and if it happened to be that, well, that could completely shift the game from being in your control over to your opponents if it was, you know, something that they had, and it just created this absurdly powerful dynamic. This is why cards like Nobleman of Crossout back in the day were so important, because spot removal is very limited and there wasn't really a lot of ways to play around cards like this. So Cyberjar, just because of the fact it was one of the most powerful board wipes, because it just special summons an absurd, like, just a number of resources out of your deck, meaning you can just do so many plays, especially by the standards of the old days, it had to make it on this list somewhere, and I think it's definitely secured that number 96 spot. But fast forwarding a little bit into the Synchro era, at number 95, we have Trishula, Dragon of the Ice Barrier. Trishula, Oh man, Trishula is just ridiculous. It was a level 9 synchro. It does require 3 monsters to make, which can be a little bit awkward, but you're getting that value back immediately because Trishula's effect, being able to banish cards out of your opponent's hand, their graveyard, and on their field was just insane. Trishula was just such a powerful card that really sort of defined the synchro era, especially upon its first release. When people figured out how to turbo into this card, people were always worried about getting hit by Trish because Trish was just an answer to so many different things. The artwork on this card is just fantastic. It's just a card that people feared so much that because it could pretty much just turn the game around just like that if you weren't ready to go against it. So definitely worthy of the spot for sure. That is, however, going to bring us to number 94. And for number 94, we have Substitoad. And if you played back when Substitoad was legal, you already know exactly where I'm going with this. But again, rather than me telling you about this card's history, I think there's someone who's much more well-versed with this card who's better off giving you the rundown.
Thank you, Cimo. Substitoad, the prime example of a card that could easily come off of the ban list if Konami added one simple sentence to its card text. Once per turn, Substitoad was released back in 2008, but back then didn't get to see any competitive play whatsoever. Although, as soon as Ronin Totem got announced early 2010 in the Shining Darkness, everyone was looking for their playset. In the same year, one of the most famous and consistent FTK decks was born, Frog FTK, simply because it was so consistent, but also because of the lack of good hand traps. DD Crow was our only good option when going second, although in most games you were just sitting duck waiting to get killed by Cannon Soldier 2.0, Mass Driver. Going first, you of course had more counters like Royal Oppression or King Tiger Wangu. Rodrigo Torgores won the European Championship with Frog FTK back in 2010, and a couple of months later Galileo de Obaldia from Panama won Worlds with the same deck, Frog FTK. Last, the side deck also played a huge role here. You could easily side out the FTK cards to Frog Monarchs and control the game like that with the Dupe Frog lock. Frog FTK didn't live long, but it sure made a name for itself when it was alive. Okay, back to you, Cimo.
Moving on to number 93, we have Yata-Garasu, and oh my god, this is probably one of my most hated cards of all time. Let me tell you guys a quick story. One of the first, if not I think the first ever tournament I attended as a young Yu-Gi-Oh player, I went up against an opponent playing Yata-Lock, and that basically was the beginning of my competitive experience and made me just want to rage quit the game immediately. Imagine your first tournament you go to, your opponent wipes your board somehow, just summons Yata-Garasu, attacks directly, you can't draw, and basically just dwindles down your resources until you have nothing, and just continuously Yata-Locks you for game. Really fun and interactive, right? Well, that's the legacy that this card has, and a lot of people's experiences were like that when Yata-Garasu was first released back in, I believe, Legacy of Darkness, and this card is just infamous. This is one of the most notorious cards in this game's history. It sounds crazy today that a 200 attack little spirit monster could inflict that much damage, but denying your opponent of the draw phase was so incredible, especially in combination with so many other cards. It was really easy to pull off, and denying your opponent the ability to continuously draw, drawing was the way you got resources, and basically there wasn't all the search power that we have nowadays, that it really made Yata this just incredible force of a card, and definitely deserving of the spot on this list. Now that is going to bring us to number 92, and for 92, we probably have one of my favorite cards of all time, Dark Magician of Chaos. Not the current Dark Magician of Chaos, Dark Magician of Chaos pre-errata. Now, for those of you who didn't play back in the day, the pre-errata Dark Magician of Chaos stated when it was summoned to the field, you were able to add any spell card from your graveyard to your hand. I believe the errata says something in the line of you add the spell during the end phase, and that's not nearly as broken as the pre-errata Demock that a lot of us veteran players got to experience, because you could summon this card off of Premature Burial to be able to summon it to add another spell back to your hand. You could use something like Reasoning or Monster Gate to pretty much sacrifice something and summon out the Demock off the top deck and basically get that card back. You could add back cards like Monster Reborn or Graceful Charity or any of the other extremely overpowered spell cards back in the day, and being able to constantly abuse that effect because there was really no limitation on it was just absurd. And not to mention every card Demock battled also got banished, which was a really big deal back then because there wasn't really a lot of ways to get cards banished, not nearly as easily as there is today, so it also acted as a very good form of removal, and not to mention it had 2,800 attack points. DMOC was one of the craziest cards for its time. There's a reason the card got an errata, and there's a reason that the card basically is nowhere near as good as it is today, but that's just because it shows how amazing of a card that it was, and that's why it made the number 92 slot. But that's gonna bring us to our number 91 card, and the last card on this video, and that card is going to be Morphing Jar, another card in the series of jars. Morphing Jar, in my opinion, is better than Cyber Jar because you can abuse it so much easier as the one in control of it. So for instance, if you have a 5-card hand, and let's say you have 4 spell or trap cards in a Morphing Jar, well, you can just set all the cards and then basically flip the Morphing Jar, and then your opponent is not really going to get any value off of it, but you just got 5 new cards in your hand for absolutely free, basically turning Morphing Jar into a +5 at most if you can manage to pull it off. Morphing Jar, again, was one of those cards that everyone had to play around because if you saw a set card on the field, you had to think to yourself, well, if that's a Morphing Jar, I could lose my entire hand, so then you would set all your cards, possibly play into something like Heavy Storm, Mystical Space Typhoon, any other sort of spell or trap removal, and there was this really interesting mind game that a card like Morphing Jar really created. It recently just came off the Forbidden and Limited list this year, 2018, and while it may not see a ton of play, if any play at all, Morphing Jar just has this crazy legacy and has honestly just been one of the most powerful cards ever printed, and that's why I had to end off this video with it at number 91. But guys, that's gonna do it for this video. Stay tuned for all the rest of the videos to come. We haven't even scratched the surface with how broken some of these cards are coming up, so I really hope you guys enjoy. So guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you really found this video entertaining, then consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member, because just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.